Welcome. We really appreciate you coming here. It's been quite a quest, I think, for everyone to come to stage 6, which is fitting for today because we want to take you on a little exploration together and maybe even through your personal experiences around representativity. So we have a little more time for interaction at the end. But if you want to say something or ask something during, just let us know. We're all close so we can have an open conversation. So the household update is, there's 2 people. One person, Tina, has a family emergency who's going to be moderating, so I'm going to do it for her. And we have another person, Nour. They couldn't get a visa, so they are in London live on the video phone. Do we have a video of Nour as well?
Give me a second.
This is amazing what technology can do. You always have like a plan C and a plan D with all these devices. So instead of having a panel where we're just going to talk and tell you everything we think is necessary to change the industry, let's use the opportunity to talk a little bit more together. We're going to share our experiences, and then we can maybe even do some live consultancy at the end, like what would be necessary to solve certain things. Yeah, because comparing international experiences is what Paladin Agency is all about. We work in 6 countries, of which Berlin was the first city where we started. So we're very happy to be here to officially launch the idea. And why we launched Paladin and why we are here is to present, hey Nour, to present representative journalism, which is the framework we use to talk about everything related to diversity and inclusion, but also investigative journalism and engagement, because we actually don't really want to talk about diversity or inclusion anymore as an all-encompassing term. We really want to break it down. What are we talking about? Why is diversity necessary? Why do you need to be inclusive? What does that come down to? So we think for journalism to be good, to be relevant, it needs to be representative. And when you look at representative journalism, you can actually break it down into representative newsroom, how representative is your content, how representative are the tools and the skills that you actually use in the newsroom. So we want to kind of take you on a journey, like how this framework makes a difference. For example, if you just think about initiatives in terms of diversity, you might talk about something very different than the person across the table is talking about. So this is how we want to use representative journalism to really ask, what are we talking about exactly? So we work on 3 levels with the consultancy and the trainings that we do. It's a newsroom level, how representative is your newsroom? Then translating to the content level, how representative is your actual content, how relevant, how representative are your sources? And then how representative is your leadership? That's like the top level. So how we do this and what we actually offer is consultancy packages. It starts at a shitstorm hotline where newsrooms or people that work in newsrooms can just call us for advice, starting at like 1 or 2 hours, all the way up to a 2-year strategy, including HR, training, self-assessment, sensibility scans, and all these things. So training and consultancy is basically what we do. But we're also working on an online learning program and a podcast upcoming, in which we want to talk a little bit more with our peers in Europe who have also been working on this, on what is actually necessary and what have your experiences been like and what do you come up against. Because what Paladin does is we want to connect the expertise and actually like up-level the efforts in newsrooms. So we're going to do this with our 2 colleagues, 2 experts, consultants and trainers. We have Linda, the freelance expert on stage, and we have Nour, the ethical expert on the connection. Nour, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm so gutted that I can't be there.
Wait, just a second. Is this on? Okay, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Oh, lower the mic, I think. Yes. Check.
Go ahead, Nour.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So, hi everyone. I hope you're all well. It's so nice to see the amount of people that showed up today. I'm really excited. So, I'm Nour Khairi. I'm a cross-border freelance journalist. I'm also a creative producer, and I am a Think Big scholar at Bristol University. I'm also founder of Kweers at the Nile, which is a journalistic initiative for LGBTQ people in the Horn of Africa. What I'm really excited to talk to you about today is sort of what I think is the core of Paladin, or the core of representative journalism in general, which is sort of converting this ethical vagueness that we talk about so much in diversity and inclusion into something very concrete, into measurable standards that promote quality journalism. So that's a little bit about me. Go ahead, Linda.
Thank you, Nour.
Thank you, Nour. As for me, I'm a Belgian journalist. I am based in Brussels, my hometown. As a journalist, I mostly write about EU policy and legal industry developments in the Benelux area. I have been a freelancer for almost 9 years. I began freelancing because I couldn't find a job, to be honest. And I also write a lot about freelancing. I have a newsletter for creative freelancers called the Friendly Freelancer, which I write or co-write with Selma Fransen. And Hadjar asked me about a year ago to become involved with Paladin.
In the middle of lockdown, never waste a good crisis.
And I think I said yes fairly quickly, because for me, I'm very passionate about freelancing and advocating for freelancing. And I also 100% believe in representative journalism, the framework you've come up with. And I said yes, but I think I sort of, for a long time, didn't really understand how those two fit together. How does freelancing gel with representative journalism? And the answer, strangely enough, came a few weeks ago when I attended a conference organized by and for freelancers of color, where the organizers, Catherine Lewis and Chandra Thomas, really articulated it really well and helped me sort of develop the language to talk about how these two connect. And so the idea is that freelancers, on the one hand, tend to have fantastic access to underrepresented communities, underrepresented groups, underrepresented sources. Anecdotally, I also think that freelancers, and again, this is really anecdotally, but I think that freelancers tend to be a little bit more representative of society at large than salaried journalists. So there's that part of it. And then at the same time, freelancers tend to be, how do I put this nicely? Most newsrooms don't treat their freelancers well, to put it mildly.
Maybe you don't need to put it mildly.
Well, I don't want to paint too broad a brush, and I work for publications that treat me really well, but I think on the whole, freelancers are usually an afterthought. They're never central to an HR hiring strategy. They're typically underpaid. They're in a huge power imbalance with news publications that makes it really difficult for them to negotiate fair rates, fair labor conditions. And for me, that's really why I'm passionate about what we do at Paladin. And what I am passionate about personally is really helping newsrooms understand that treating their freelancers well offers huge potential to produce better journalism that is more representative of the communities they cover or should cover, in short, to practice representative journalism.
Amazing, thank you. Yes, it really ties into basically all of the values we're going to talk with you about today. Because the whole idea basically is to kind of those power structures that you're talking about that kind of reproduce the lack of representation, to work around those by using strategy and by actually looking at what's the quality journalism we want to establish. And therefore, the first value, I'm going to use it to introduce myself through telling you a little bit about our history. Because it's true what Linda said, I came up with the framework representative journalism, but the way we built it out, we really did it together at Paladin. But the word representative journalism, or the term, was actually a heritage from my last company, Vileine Academy, which has been many things, like a startup pivots all the time. Like, what is necessary? What do we need to be? First, it was a feminist platform. Then it became an HR bringing talents into newsrooms company. Then we started doing consultancy. And then we actually started an investigative journalism school to kind of combine all things. Consultancy about diversity, bring talented women together and have them mentor each other, have them work on underrepresented topics through investigation, and actually empower them with modern tools like OSINT, open source investigation, data journalism, to really have them be able to do research for a couple of months and then bring it to the newsroom, like with facts, instead of just needing a manager to say, oh, maybe we should do something about this group of people, and not really going into the actual depth of the representation of relevant topics.
Can I interrupt for a second? I think maybe I could also sort of play the role of the audience member who doesn't exactly follow. What is OSINT?
Sure. Open source investigation.
Thank you, Hadjar.
It's a very cool term you can use to make it seem like you are some online detective for the FBI, when actually it can also just mean that you're Googling stuff on Twitter. Open source investigation is basically any information you can put together based on open sources you can find on the internet. But if you actually have strategies and tools to do this systematically, you can really come up with structural proof for even government corruption and things like that, just by sources you can pull together on the internet. But people need to be empowered with those tools, and to also have the space and the trust to actually investigate and cover those topics. So that's kind of like what we ended at with Vileine, and then it was like, okay, this consultancy for newsrooms really works, and training new talents as well. Maybe let's bring this all together and find the best international colleagues who have also been pioneering on their own, because Linda has founded a Friendly Freelancer as well, for example, and work internationally, strategically. Like, okay, after a few years, we've exchanged so many experiences. We keep coming up against the same patterns in newsrooms. Let's work together to really up-level international newsrooms and get past just talking about diversity. So therefore, innovation is our first value, that we also always really centralize, like, okay, how can we make journalism better? And yes, use diversity and inclusion as an obvious, necessary part for that. Oh yeah, my personal background, by the way, before founding Vileine, is I've been a journalist in writing, radio, television for 14 years. And yeah, same problem in every newsroom I was. So the next value is lean. Is for Nour to talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, you're on.
Thanks, Hadjar, for that explanation. So lean, I think the value of lean really applies to me personally. And for me, it centers around being goal-oriented. So, for example, my experience freelancing, especially as an early career journalist, sometimes there's this feeling of, you should just take what you can get. But I quickly learned that it's really important to sort of align core values with the publications that I'm working with. And even within that process, a lot of disagreements can arise. For example, especially working in the arts, like artist managers asking for promotions from publications, or just in general as a freelancer, just not being able to have any influence on the representative aspects of a publication. So as like a circle of people who are interested in representative journalism, I think the main thing is looking at like the efficiency of communication chains. How do people solve disagreements when they arise? Or do they have like a structure for how to handle these things? And how, for example, we keep going back to being a freelancer, because so many of these problems arise when it comes to freelancers. Do freelancers have a way of protecting their rights, or are there any rights that they can protect whenever, any disagreement arises, or they have any issue with editors? So I would say being lean it just asks us to adjust ourselves in service of a goal or a project, rather than adjusting the goal or the project in service of ourselves or in service of some other thing that pops up halfway through. So communication chains is a really important thing. Is that efficient? Or is it actually impeding the goal, or impeding the goal to deliver good representative stories, if that makes sense? I hope it did.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of like the Marie Kondo thing that everyone has been seeing, I think, around their homes, but maybe also looking around their lives to the people around them and hobbies as well. Like, does this actually spark joy? It's not just about making you feel good, right? It's like, what is the purpose of that thing in front of you? And let's be really minimalist about it. And when you're so isolated as a freelancer, for example, or just trying to bring representative journalism, you're always going to have that same discussion about how relevant is it. Because a manager who isn't connected to these underrepresented perspectives might not understand the relevance. So in order to really be able to bring in your voice and your quality, you need to have that communication lean and minimalist from the beginning, and really based on the core values of why you're working together. And always make sure that the person is hiring you is really clear on like the quality and the values of why they are hiring you, instead of, we think you're talented, maybe you can try to do something for us.
If I can jump in on that, I think for me, a key sort of red flag is when people ask me to get involved with something, and I'm like, but why? And there's not really an answer. And then it's kind of like a dead giveaway that I'm not being asked for my qualities. I'm there because I take a box.
That's like the whole manifesto and the whole framework that we work on is always kind of forcing to tunnel the question, like, why are we doing this? What are we talking about? What is necessary? What is the next step? And it's a good, all the way at the end, we have the last value. It's going to be deliverable based. Like, what deliverables, what are we actually trying to deliver? What are our targets? That's always the end goal. And to know how clear that is a really good test on like how well do we know what we're doing here and why are we here. So that's just a little preview. So the next value is security, is also for Nour. Just jumping in on a little technical tool also that is very dear to my heart personally, but also very underestimated in newsrooms, is privacy rights and privacy tools. And especially working with marginalized communities as sources, it's also very important to be aware of the digital security aspect as well. Linda, have you ever, as a freelance expert, ever seen any newsroom be aware of this privacy aspect?
Specifically when they're sort of working with freelancers?
Or in general, maybe even digital security?
Well,
privacy aspect of digital security.
There's a small caveat in the sense that I haven't worked in a ton of newsrooms because I've been freelancer, since I started as a journalist. But I can say that none of the publications I've worked with have ever done any training or sort of like, any training on how to protect the privacy of your sources, how to protect the information that you're gathering.
Possibly it was in the newsrooms, but not for the freelancers.
I would assume so, yeah, absolutely. I can say that I downloaded, as a journalist, Signal just like 4 weeks ago. That's how unaware and like behind I am.
So, Nour, as an ethical expert, I'm sure you agree privacy is important. Can you tell us a little bit more about the security value of Paladin?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually really surprised to hear that, like, privacy and digital security especially is not given it's sort of due time when it comes to training. Because I think, like, for me, when I first started getting into journalism, that might have been like the beginning of people talking about these things more. But yeah, I think the privacy of not only journalists, but subjects that you are speaking to, sources, etc., is super important. Obviously, a really huge example is the heavy risk on journalists, especially in the Middle East and in North Africa, which is like the region that I'm most familiar with. So I find that, for example, in some of the stories that I want to explore, my sources end up being journalists themselves. And that becomes a whole thing because of the risks surrounding journalists or even advocates for specific issues that might be suppressed by governments, or in general that there's some kind of threat around people who advocate for those issues. Let's say women's rights, for example. So recently in Sudan, there was a women's rights activist who was literally just taken from her home. And even poets are sometimes prosecuted for talking about certain things. So who are the sources that we use, and is there some kind of protocol or some kind of a standardized protocol that we can use that sort of protects their identities? Of course, that seems really clear, but especially when it comes to working with foreign journalists, that might not be as straightforward. And I think one of the main reasons that ties this into representative journalism is that we kind of assume sometimes when we're working with foreign journalists where the danger lies or where the threat is, or we sort of assume we know from what angle that they might feel threatened or they might not feel safe, and that might not be accurate. So I think really taking a look at security and privacy, not just as like, okay, of course we have to be secure with journalists and with sources, but just from a contextual lens, do we have the context? And again, going back to freelancers, are freelancers also subject to these protocols, and are they also protected whenever they are working with newsrooms? So that's one angle of secure, but there's obviously so much to it. So if anybody else wants to jump in on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nour. I don't see any hands for urgent comments just yet, so I'm going to keep it moving to the next value, which is very central right there in the middle, engaging. And giving it to you, Linda.
Sure. I will tell the story of a publication that didn't do so well.
Nice.
When it comes to
anecdotes.
When it comes to engaging audiences, one of my first gigs as a professional journalist was as a part-time assistant editor on a freelance basis for this expat publication. So a publication targeted at people who had moved to Belgium for work. I think it was a pretty good publication. We gave a lot of opportunities to young writers who didn't have huge portfolios or impressive bylines. We did a lot of off the beaten path kind of stories, quirky stories about some eco farmer in like a rural region of Belgium, let's say. And I'm still very proud of the journalism we did at that publication. But one thing I certainly noticed after having worked there for a while was that our journalism was very much a one-way street, in the sense that we put out our news into the world, and we got zero feedback. We didn't hear from our audience most of the time. When we did, it was usually a troll commenting on something, even though we didn't know the term troll at the time. And I think part of that engagement failure was also a misunderstanding of our audience. We conceived ourselves as a publication targeted at expats. So expats are people who move to another country for work. There's a huge, obviously, expat community in Belgium because of the EU institutions. At the same time, there are a lot of people who move for work to another country who are not conceived as expats, who are seen as migrants, as economic migrants. And you could have, obviously, a very long and interesting conversation about why some people are called expats and other people, like my father, who moved to Belgium from Ghana, is called a migrant or an economic migrant. But let's maybe not do that. What I wanted to go back to
another time, though.
What I wanted to go back to was we saw ourselves as an expat publication. I think we should have seen ourselves as a publication that caters to newcomers to Belgium in a much broader sense. And I think had we done that, we could have done a tremendous amount of service journalism, journalism focused on addressing issues that our readers, the communities that we covered, ran into. Like, the Belgian institutions are quite hard to navigate, even for Belgians. There's a ton of red tape, administrative, paperwork that you have to get through. And that's really hard to navigate as a newcomer, as someone who hasn't grown up in that country. And so again, I think if we had understood and realized that our audience was actually not the audience we thought it was, we could have produced better, I think, more relevant service journalism for them. For instance, like a story about how do you get your residency card, that kind of stuff. Or what do I do how can you file a discrimination complaint, for instance? And if we had done that, I think we could have gotten a ton of engagement from the audience that we failed to see. And sadly, that publication shut down a few years ago, and the ending of the publication for me illustrates the overall engagement failure, because at the time I'd already left the publication, but my ex-colleagues mounted a social media campaign to build sort of pressure on the funders not to pull the funding for the publication. And it didn't work. We had a hashtag, we had photos, they barely got any retweets, and it was just like a very painful realization and illustration of the fact that in spite of 8 years of publishing, we had failed to engage our audience. Sadly, that's a very depressing story.
An audience that's quite large and you actually know exists. So that anecdote is so good, because what you said, like the audience we failed to see and the audience they didn't actually know they had, that goes for any issue of a lack of representative journalism, I guess, because what you have when you have a lack of representation in your journalism is you have actually a lot of niche audiences and subjects that aren't being addressed. So looking at it this way is like so relevant for every instance, probably. Nice. Oh yeah, this is a good time to throw in some more technical terms, since we're at a technical conference. Really a good way to start your engagement is work on data insights about your audience, and just starting like, who is our audience actually, instead of just stating it, which is what journalist managers often do. And two, what has been very beneficial for our investigators at Vileine back then, and has really helped them with representative investigations, that one actually has won a prize simply by crowdsourcing information. So she started by building a database of 100 people of a group segment that was obviously underrepresented. She asked them standardized questions, followed up on their leads, and within 4 months had an investigation that got into the Kamervragen. The parliament asked questions about it too. So especially when you have underrepresented topics and audiences, you can start at a very easy level with crowdsourcing information and building data. Like just 3 data points can already give you so much information. So that's engaging. On to the next value. Is there anything you want to add in?
I can just I can just say that we did not look at any stats at that publication. No.
Yeah, and also your audience would have been much bigger if you would have addressed it the way you said.
For sure.
So anti-fragile is the next one. This is my favorite value. Does anyone know what this means? It's not my term. It's a term coined by a philosopher who's, I think, more famous for his book, The Black Swan. Yes, rings a few bells. So anti-fragile is really inspiring, especially in a crisis. Like I said at the beginning, never waste a good crisis. Because anti-fragility is basically about building to, actually like we started with lean communication, starting with a good foundation of core values and keeping things minimalist and knowing what you are doing and what you're talking about. That also connects to anti-fragility a lot. Because when things get chaotic or confusing or hard, which is always the case with any diversity initiative, or any development for innovation, really, because when you're growing, of course you're going to come up against things, and people might not all be on the same line, but you want to grow together as a team, and you don't just want to reproduce those few perspectives that are the loudest. So you need to grow together with this diversity of perspectives and tools and innovation. And to be able to successfully do that, you need to be anti-fragile. And to, instead of build and gear yourself up to resist a crisis, actually be grounded and fluid enough so that when things change, you can easily change gears, align with each other again, and move towards your goalpost again. So yeah, I would really give you the tip to check that out. Anti-Fragility by Nassim Nicholas Taleb is brilliant. I think especially more relevant since the corona crisis. And for me personally, I just want to say about anti-fragility, it might seem very simple, but working in 6 different countries through video and with different newsrooms, with all different communication styles, a big part of anti-fragility is also just making sure that any docs or resources we share are central, can always be found by anyone who needs them at the moment that they need them, can be easily understood by anyone who might not have the backlog of experience. If I'm working with a leader in a newsroom who might not be there the next year, will the next person actually be able to access the resources and pick the development back up? Because we're talking about long-term development when it comes to representative journalism. So to be anti-fragile is also to be like thinking about the long term of what's the most important core things that we want to be there for the next person or the next situation that we can't know about yet.
Like this, for instance. This is also being anti-fragile.
Exactly.
This whole situation.
This is a good, yeah, and it's actually nice and personal this way. So the next value is reflective. It's not just about evaluation. I'm getting really excited. It's not just about evaluation, which is obviously important, right, when you're working on this long-term development, but you still want to work towards concrete, visible goals that people can actually see, okay, we're getting more representative and this is exciting, and we're getting more quality journalism. Reflective as a value for us is also about not being polarizing and trying to just work on the surface level of diversity of, oh, okay, we found some underrepresented perspectives now. We didn't think about them before, but we found them now. Let's just put them together and have them all fight or really polarize their perspectives. And then you have for an exciting piece and we've covered everything and then we can move on to the next story. No, we really think like all these aspects should be integrated. Like you said, like how do you actually integrate the different perspectives and then work on the next layer, uncover the next layer of underrepresented stories. So nuanced conversations is very important. Yeah, and then
I actually have a good example for this type of polarization and merely having several opposing perspectives, that's not gratifying. There's a journalism publication in a Benelux country that I think really tries to have different perspectives, and I think they recently published an op-ed by one person that I found very offensive, to be honest. And then they had another piece, like an interview with another person, and I'm not going to go too into the details, but I could very clearly tell that the thinking was sort of, well, we have this sort of extreme view, and then we have this extreme view over there. Let's have it in the magazine together. But they weren't talking to each other. And as a reader, I was very annoyed at that op-ed without sort of any like conversation going on. It was just like airing this view into the world without any questions asked or any context added. As a reader, I found that ungratifying, deeply ungratifying.
Whoa, this is such a recurring pattern. I'm getting flashbacks of when I was a consultant for Dutch newspapers, and I was like tearing out all these examples to show them they were doing the same thing week after week, which was during Black Lives Matter. Exactly, they would have an op-ed of someone representing why, like an activist, usually, and then have, in the days after, have one op-ed reaction that this wasn't a relevant story, have one usually white, older male scientist explaining why this is now a movement, and then have another scientist a day later explaining why there's too much attention for this. So yeah, just looking at representation, you can see that the opinion and the perspective is being represented on one side, and the other side is like science, relevance, credibility. So there's also, it's not just polarizing, but what you're saying, it's also reproducing unfair hierarchies and blind spots. Yeah, happens all the time, unfortunately. Good example. So that was our last value. Now we have some time left, and we really want to talk to you. If you want to share your experiences with the rest of what you think is maybe internationally relevant for all of us to kind of work on these recurring patterns. Aren't just in newsrooms, when we're talking about representing the audience needs, can also be representing your client's needs. So yeah, anything you want to share with us? And of course, any questions you have. First, I want to just ask Nour and Linda one last question. Nour, right now, because we started doing this in the middle of lockdown, and even though you are not physically here, for us, this is the first physical get-together after doing lots of online work. We've been in a few newsrooms during lockdown where everything we've been working on for years didn't change, it just got worse during the crisis. So we can probably assume the state of the industry in 2022 is still the same as in 2021. What are you most excited to work on now? Like problems in newsrooms that your hands are most itching to work on in 2022? And maybe some situations did change for you, I don't know.
So just to make sure I heard it correctly, what are the things I'm most excited to work on in a newsroom, like if I had the chance to? Right?
Basically, if you got a wild card, yes.
I think for me, it's really identifying ethical blind spots and responding to them in a strategic way, rather than responding in a way that satisfies the situation for the moment. Because as you know, this is sort of what we've been talking about. If you do that, then these problems will probably come up over and over again, because they're not just in the moment problems, they're kind of patterns within the structure of newsrooms or media organizations in general. So I think for me, identifying those blind spots, responding to them in a way that not just ticks the boxes of the values we've been talking about, but really, really, really creates like a long-term solution for that newsroom. And, you know, sometimes, like in the time that we are in right now, people might not be, people might not see the potential that this would have for them because of like that kind of short-term thinking. But I think that's where I would want to come in, is to like convince people that this is like sustainable and long-term and worth it. So yeah.
Thank you, Nour. I really feel that as well. Personally, just thinking of the ethical problems I ran into working as a consultant in newsrooms. When you're brought in to solve the problem, or you actually try to come in yourself to raise the problem to a manager, it's already too late. There's already someone being exposed to that situation and probably having to compromise their professional work just to raise the problem, just to find a way to raise the problem. So yeah, you've already lost at that point. So really trying to not let those opportunities be wasted and let their work and effort be wasted, and try to map those out and structurally prevent those is so important. And what about you?
I think that if I had a wild card to work with a publication or a newsroom I really wanted to, I'm sort of hesitating a little bit. Should I go for the one where I think our approach would have the biggest impact because it's sort of the biggest newsroom or newspaper, or the one that I think is already doing a really good job, and like I just want to push them a little bit further. I think I'm going to go for the last one. There's a newspaper I read every day, so I know the bylines of all the journalists pretty well, and I also know people who work for that publication, and they are halfway there in the sense that they have journalists, they have reporters from underrepresented communities covering those underrepresented communities, but there's very clearly no strategic take a step back approach. It's very much, all the burden is very much put on the individual.
Make up for the lack of development that the last 20 years.
You can just tell that it's not part of the HR approach, that they want to be more representative of the communities that they cover and to produce journalism that is relevant to those communities. But it's very much just tied to the individual journalists. And when those journalists leave, and I think there's a fat chance they will, because it's hard to feel like you're not reflected in a newsroom, that you're the only one, and that you're always there as a representative of a particular community. That's really hard on a day-to-day level. And I think that's why I would like to work with them, because otherwise it's just going to be this thing that keeps reproducing itself, where when that person leaves, you hire someone else, and then the whole circle happens again. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, it's really. You cannot be, well, you can for a few years be an activist and a consultant for your newsroom and a journalist and an HR expert bringing in new journalists. But after a few years, we should also want those people to just be journalists and focus on their work. And would be really nice if we could come in as strategists so they can do more journalism, right?
Absolutely.
Even though, of course, the work they do, that root work is probably always going to be a necessary step. Like, you can't just bring in a few consultants and have them solve everything. It's often after years and years and years of lots of internal dialogues that have been happening behind the scenes. A lot of people don't even know about, that the soil is actually prepared for change to happen. So let's not discredit that either, of course. Yeah. So what do you think is a problem in newsrooms or around you? I'm going to give you the mic.
Thank you. So I want to share something and make a point, maybe. I'm a journalist from Brazil. I'm co-founder of feminist media there, and we've been through all this process of representative journalism. So building up our team and trying to make it more representative in all that you said. It was really a struggle in the beginning, and now we are kind of the middle of the path. And I think there are two points that I should add to what you said. That one is resources and training, because when you talk about underrepresented communities, many people don't have resource to get a formal graduation or training. So it's important to have space in the newsrooms to train people, to train new people, young people, so they can be part of her team and give resources for these people to work to. Because, I mean, I'm a privileged woman. I can have my computer. Some people in favelas in Brazil cannot even buy a computer. So that's one point. And the other one is mental health, because when you talk about trauma, I mean, a lot of people come with trauma, queer people, poor people. So, yeah, and for so it's important to have that, because it influences a lot the work, the quality of life, people, and everything's crossed. So when the whole newsroom is like mentally ill, the work doesn't flow, things doesn't happen. So, and I mean, we are an organization built by journalists, and we had to learn HR the hard way. And it was a real struggle during the pandemic dealing with mental health. So
things just start stacking up on each other.
Yeah,
that's anti-fragility as well, right?
For sure,
yeah.
It's anti-fragility.
Thank you so much. We're gonna include this in our manifesto, I think. Thank you. Can you maybe come? I'm just gonna give you a card right now. Yeah. Okay. There's a stack I wanted to put by the door. I'm just going to put it here on stage. If anyone wants to grab a card, you can just grab it later. Okay. Yes.
Thank you. A question. So if a newsroom wants to make use of this framework, how can they make sure that they actually apply all those different values that you spoke about? Is this mostly through training? Or are there any other elements that they can use to make sure that they make use of this on a daily basis?
For sure. This is pretty much the front of the framework. On the back side, there's many more little nudges and things. What we have is two things. We offer trainings. So we have a training menu exactly to train people in newsrooms, but also to train managers or to train HR staff on things we've learned in our experiences in consultancies and strategies. But what you're talking about is what we find most exciting is actually like, how do we guide a journey through this, guide a newsroom through this journey of learning and developing together and really staying on this goal and framework. This we do with consultancy packages. We call it Stackable Consultancy Packages. We have like package 1 to 6, and you can combine them. Package 1 is basically the shitstorm hotline. It's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what the problem is. We can book you on a call for 1 or 2 hours, and we're just going to give you a very quick assessment, like what is your most important problem area right now, and what's your biggest opportunity also right now for immediate change. And then it goes all the way up to long-term strategy, which incorporate an AR trajectory, incorporate an engagement strategy, and we can kind of like turn those packages on and off based on what your particular newsroom needs. And we also advise newsrooms on where to start, of course, to keep it lean too.
I was just wondering about the companies that come to you. Is it often after a crisis has happened, so they're in the news for being not non-representative or things like that, or what's the percentage of people that come to you in a really positive way, and then how do you then deal with those companies differently?
I wish they would come to us more often in a crisis. I think it's scary to do so. I've noticed they often come to us right after a few crises in a row, and after some recurring patterns. They know they have a problem to work on. They know they aren't well aware of what that problem exactly is because they have tried some things, but they keep running into the same problems. And they've also discovered, and this is usually when they come to us, that if they keep on trying things without a bigger strategy or knowing what they're talking about, they as leaders will lose credibility and especially will lose motivation in their team and maybe start like having polarizing stuff happening in the team. So yeah, this is how we've been approached so far, is usually when a few people in the company say like, okay, maybe it's time to work a little bit more strategic. But I would very much like to find a way to make it easier for them to contact us or for us to contact them in the middle of a shitstorm. If anyone has ideas or ideas on how we can better serve those needs where it's actually necessary, please let us know.
Yeah, thank you for the interesting insights, first of all. I was wondering how your idea of representative journalism applies to communities where you have a lot of unvaccinated people, people who are prone to conspiracy theories, right-wing people. How do you see, do you think those should be represented in a newsroom? And how do you do that?
Well, representation we see as a basic quality factor for journalism because let's go back all the way to the basics. Why is journalism important? It's a very important pillar of democracy, right? Journalists strive to find the truth and to share the truth with the population so that the population is empowered in a democracy. It's not just about the population getting the information about the power in the democracy, it's also about the power being able to listen to the population about what's actually going on. So journalism is this very important pillar, and it only works if it's representative. If your journalism isn't representative of the population, this back and forth between the power and the population, it will not only not work to sustain democracy, but it will also, if you have a lack of representation in certain corners, it will also distort the image in such a way that the power imbalances in society and the blind spots of truth and the misinformation and conspiracy theories, everything will only get larger. Yes, and I also don't think we as journalists should be the one to say what's right and what's wrong. For people, especially talking about diversity and also the trust in news, maybe we should be a little bit more humble and just listen to what people need, the information that people need, and try to not judge which communities can be addressed and which not, but just focus on being curious and finding out which communities maybe aren't being seen or what information is being misrepresented. Thank you so much for that question.
Any more questions?
Okay, then I'm going to ask a question to you, the audience. We're working on an online learning program. What would be the first topic you think we should definitely address in an online course? If you could have like a free online course in your environment or newsroom right now, what would be most necessary? Oh, I think the people for the next session are waiting. I see a lot of faces thinking. I would definitely like to talk to you more. I'm going to leave a stack of cards. Let's set up meetings. And this manifesto, we don't share it online, but we do share it personally. So just send us an email and we will share it with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.